All right. You say you want a resolution. We are coming at you today with a recording of some perspective and guidance on how to write resolutions for the San Mateo County Dems and the California Democratic Party in particular, but there are principles here that could be applied to any number of organizations. And so let's dive right in.
First, you introduce yourself.
Oh, all right, all right. My name is Karen Tkach-Tasman. I am an alternate on the San Mateo County Democratic Central Committee, and I co-chair the resolutions committee of that body with the esteemed David Baruto, who I'll let introduce himself.
That would be me. Thank you for the illustrious introduction. David Baruto. I'm an elected member of the San Mateo County Democratic Central Committee and also co-chair of our resolutions committee. Turn it back to you if you want to kick it off.
Sure. So starting it off, this question of what is a resolution and what is it not? Why the funny language? And I included a little snapshot here of some resolution from 1775. And it's got a lot of the hallmarks of the resolutions we see today, starting with whereas clauses. It appears to be a long run-on sentence with a bunch of semicolons, which is generally not how we're taught to write in school for most things. So David, what's up with resolutions? Why are they the way they are? And what are they meant for?
Well, in many ways, it's quasi-legal language. I mean, this is what you would see in essentially how laws are written, how things are written in Congress. It's to really clarify and to lay out, a specific set of principles, sets of language that deals with a topic. If you ever look at a bill, for example, they might have those whereas clauses. So this is really just to ensure that it's understood that this is intended to be a statement of principle, that this is supposed to flow like that, like a legal description would.
Yeah, so you mentioned a statement of principle. So getting down to what is it, what isn't it? Resolutions are very basic statements of principles or beliefs held by an organization that votes to adopt it. And what is a resolution not? And David, you filled this out, so I'm happy to let you expound.
I've been doing this for a long time. And what it is not is a persuasive essay. You're not trying to cram in something that you would write, in an academic sense. These are much broader. It's 400 words. Everything has to be contained within it. It's not particularly kind of a screed against something. I mean, it's really a broad statement covering a topic, but it is not to necessarily be something academic or have citations or get in something expository that's overly complex. This is pretty simple stuff, very direct. And what it's also not is for us is we don't attack people, we don't attack organizations, we talk about an issue.
Yeah. And one of the things sometimes that we run across when we are reviewing resolutions is around the scope of them. And so sometimes when you're addressing a certain issue, when we say sort of broad statements of principle, there's a sort of a limit to that on not just getting into broad everything related to that principle. So, if you're talking about traffic safety and would you get into other forms of safety, and no, you would want to keep it sort of focused. So it's a broad statement of principle, but on a focused topic. And Adina has a hand up, so I'd love to hear her question.
Sure.
Okay.
This is back on the technology where I went back to the invitation and I tried to join on my mobile where you put in the code for the meeting, and then it's supposed to either ask you for your identification or ask you for a password. And instead it says this meeting requires authentication. I think that there may be something insufficiently configured in this meeting, such that there may be more people than me who wanted to attend via mobile or without a Zoom account, who are trying to get in. So if you are interested in helping such people, you might want to reconfigure it, or you can keep going and then just send out the video to everybody. But I tried to test it, and I think there's something misconfigured. So.
I got in no problem, just linking from the Zoom that we have on our calendar that we send out. So I did not have that experience.
Well, yeah, I'm wondering, the thing is, I'm not confident I could reconfigure it properly if I tried. Perhaps, David, if you want to, if there's things you would think to fiddle with while we're talking, that's great. I'm sharing my screen, and I also just feel like I'll screw things up rather than.
All right, maybe if you want to continue, I can type in at least in the Slack to say, is there anybody else having trouble getting in? Because that would be even more motivation to try to address whatever the issue is, if there is such an issue.
Cool, thank you. All right, so back to your regularly scheduled programming. So resolution writing checklist, whatever your institution may be, it is a good idea to, if you're thinking about having a resolution passed by a body you're in, to do your homework about that organization's resolution process and format specifications. And we're going to be talking about that specifically for SMC DEMS and KDEM today, but another club, another organization, another central committee you might be in might do it a little differently. So that's the first part. And a great way to do that is searching the organization's website and bylaws for any guidelines. Control F for resolution is always helpful. But oftentimes, as we know, sorting through text like that can be a little confusing. And so a good option is always to ask people who might know, members of the resolution committee, the chair or president or the organization, and just say, hey, I'm thinking about writing a resolution. Where do I start? And just avoid, you spending a ton of effort fitting everything into a format that ends up being not the one accepted by your organization. And it's always a good idea to learn by example, by reading a handful of resolutions that have been previously passed by your organization to get a sense of the structure, the feel, and the scope. Adina, were you saying something? David, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, and we have many examples on our website under the tab resolution, so you can absolutely look and see what we've done over the past really couple of years, really. Plenty of examples. There we go.
There we go. Yeah. So, for example, the SMC DEMS, San Mateo County Democratic Central Committee, we have a page where we have all the resolutions we've adopted over the last couple of years. It sort of explains a bit here at the top what our resolutions are and a bit about the process for getting it through, and we'll talk about that more in a second. And although also this page is where we will host this video. So if you found it, you're probably on this page. And so, a slightly different example is from KDEM. So KDEM is the California Democratic Party, also known as CDP, also known as the various names, but it's basically the state party, state Democratic Party for California. All the county parties are chartered organizations of the state party. And these are things that weren't clear to me when I was first getting involved. And so because of that relationship, a lot of the rules are the same, but some things are different. We're going to talk about that. But basically, here's an example of on the KDEM webpage, you can find their instructions for resolutions. A sample resolution, things to read before submitting, the process of how you do it, and other information such as formatting guidelines. And I believe they have a link there to pass resolutions as well.
Yeah, and their guidelines are similar to those that we use, and those are contained in our bylaws as well, but it's a good place to start because there are certain rules about constructing a resolution. For example,
so these are the kind of style rules that are in common between the California Democratic Party and the San Mateo County Democratic Central Committee. The resolution must fit on one page. It must be a max of 400 words, including the title. Please don't use hyperlinks. They don't last. And all of the relevant information must be on the resolution page. So, if your whole statement of value hinges on a website that's over there, that website can change and then your statement of value is up for grabs. So better not do that. It must contain no more than 3 whereas clauses and no more than 2 resolve clauses. And this can vary across organizations, but for KDEM and the San Mateo County Party, these are the rules. And the whereas clauses must contain facts and statements that build a logical case to and are directly connected to the solutions contained in the resolve clauses. So there needs to be a logical flow between what's in the whereas. It's providing the evidence that builds the support for the conclusions in therefore be it resolved. And David, thoughts?
Yeah, and again, I mean, broadly, in terms of broad statements, again, it doesn't have to be cited academic articles, or we're not talking about that. If we're talking about, pedestrian safety, things like, X number of people have been hurt on this, avenue. I mean, that's fine. You don't have to get into such detail about things. This isn't a persuasive argument. This isn't an academic paper. So just very general.
Yeah. So, and you'd also, unlike an academic paper, it should be one long run-on sentence. So use semicolons to, fit your needs. But it's basically one 400-word max long.
So, yeah. And we have an example. So
we do. But first, some differences between the San Mateo County Democrats and KDEM when it comes to resolutions. The first is that within some of the resolutions for the San Mateo County Democratic Party can ask people to do stuff. It can ask elected officials to support X, Y, or Z, or to condemn X, Y, or Z, or to take action in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
But KDEM, that is not allowed. So KDEM resolutions don't make specific asks of people. So if you got a resolution passed through the county party and you're looking to take it up to the state, and we'll talk about that process in a second. If your county resolution had stuff in it that was asking people to do things, you would need to remove those parts of it for it to be acceptable in the state process.
Yeah, and to sort of clarify, so if you were asking at the local level, something about healthcare policy, we want our representatives to do X about healthcare policy, we can do that. But at KDEM, no. You can talk about the policy, that the policy is good, that the party should support the policy, but not to direct our representatives to do something. Anyway.
And the other piece of it is that while in San Mateo County Dems, we sometimes pass resolutions that support legislation, KDEM does not, because they have a separate legislative committee that declares support for certain legislations. So you may have to modify your county level resolution before taking it to the state party. And in general, you might be in a position where you're trying to rally a bunch of different organizations to pass a similar resolution. And if you're doing that, you might, anticipate that you have to modify certain things according to the specific rules of the different groups. So, maybe if you go to the Alameda County Dems, they've got a slightly different structure, say, find out and adapt your resolution accordingly. And, but you should be able to maintain the same principles across different organizations, even while conforming to different formats.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens after a resolution is submitted? So we're going to talk through this process for the county Dems and then for the state party, and I'll maybe talk through the county piece, and David can talk through the state piece. But basically, when it comes to our county party, there's two options you have if you write a resolution. You can submit it under urgency, where it will be voted on immediately in the next meeting of the county party.
Well, meaning the same meeting in which it was introduced.
The same meeting it was introduced. So presumably you got something on the agenda for a certain meeting, you got the resolution on the agenda, and you're asking the body to vote then and there on the resolution on the first time it's introduced. And that requires a 2/3 majority, which is, a bit more challenging, but it depends on, one, the urgency of getting it out, because it might be a very timely message you want to send, and two, whether you think you can get the 2/3.
And that may require edits done on the fly, because if you have members who have some concerns or want some changes, that has to be done again then and there.
Yes, and editing by committee live on Zoom is always fun, but so that's one option. The other option is to go the non-urgency route, and that is it's first introduced at a committee meeting, central committee meeting, in what's called a first reading. So it gets shown to the whole county party. It's read through. People might have some questions that come up, but it's not voted on in that moment. Instead, the resolution committee, which is what David and I chair, will then take that resolution, review it, make edits and suggestions, and then we will, among ourselves, come up with a recommendation, generally of either, yes, we recommend, we recommend voting yes on it, we recommend voting no on it, or we have no recommendation. Or sometimes it can be, we would recommend it only if it had, these changes, but usually we incorporate the changes into our draft of it. And, in this process, there can be some back and forth with the authors. And so if you're an author of a resolution, if someone on the committee asks you a question about it, it's good to engage in that dialogue to sort of maximize the chance of your intentions being understood and things moving forwid.
It also sometimes helps to sort out potential opposition too, because occasionally during the first reading, someone might say, well, I don't feel very good about this resolution, and here's why. In the intervening month, then there can be some dialogue as to potential compromise so that the final product then can have a better chance of moving forward.
Yeah, so that first reading can be a forum for discussion as well. And then finally, so at the next meeting of the county central committee, the resolution committee will say, we recommended whatever their recommendation was, and then the full body will vote on it, and there might be some more discussion at that time, and that just requires a simple majority to pass. And so here's an example of a resolution passed by the county party in 2020 that I thought was a good one. It talks about support of the Black Lives Matter movement and increased safety for county residents. It uses as its whereas clauses, evidence about the need for the Black Lives Matter movement and for policies to change to increase safety and reduce racial disparity. And then in the therefore be resolved clauses, you'll note that it affirms support for the movement. It condemns police brutality. It thanks certain representatives who have spoken up, and strongly urges elected legislators to enact police reform legislation. So this is that asking people to do stuff piece, which is okay at our county party level, but isn't allowed at the state party. And then further, it was resolved calling upon police departments and the sheriff's department to update policies, hiring and review practices, de-escalation, et cetera. So this is, leaning in pretty heavily to asking people to do stuff. Yeah, David, do you have any?
No, right. At the local level, we can call directly upon folks to take an action. And in this case, this one was a lot of them. At the state party, again, there are mechanisms for doing this, but just not through the resolutions process.
Oh, that's very interesting. Maybe as a aside, what is the mechanisms for asking folks to do things at the state party level?
Well, if it's, again, if it's legislative, then there are specific ways to get behind the pieces of legislation to support specific policy, achievements. Also, the party platform, that's a whole other process where some of these issues might become part of the party platform that, hey, the party, we want these reforms made. And this is, and that's a way of holding, candidates actually accountable, because theoretically, if they're endorsed by the Democratic Party, if they seek the endorsement, well, this is our platform. This is what we expect you to do. But
That's
again,
really helpful.
different processes than resolution.
Yeah, so resolutions are not your only tool, particularly at the state party level. There's platforms and there's legislation committee. So taking a county level resolution to the state party. So this is where my knowledge gets real hazy. But there's a question of, so who can introduce a resolution to CADEM? So David, if you want to talk about this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's relatively the same process in the sense that you're an individual, maybe a few individuals who have an issue you care about. Again, has to be crafted a little differently than we do locally, but a broad statement of principles about a subject. One can author that, or amongst friends author it. But in order to take it to the next level, it has to have, some kind of an imprimatur, some kind of a blessing of a local organization or critical mass of state central committee members. And I'll get to what that is in a second. So, for example, if you get it through our central committee, that's one way. A chartered democratic organization like a caucus or some other entity, but like the state caucus, progressive caucus, Jewish caucus, whatever it might be. Or signatories of 25 Democratic State Central Committee members. Well, what is that? Well, if you are a delegate to the state convention, which if you are an elected Central Committee member, you typically are, or if you were elected in the assembly district election, or if you were appointed by a partisan elected official, 25 of those could then take it to the resolutions committee. Or in this case, and I wish we did have our regional chair with us, but the regional meetings take place typically before convention and executive board meetings for the purpose of discussing a number of issues prior to those delegates convening. So one can take a resolution to a regional meeting, and if it's approved by the majority of those delegates in attendance, that's another means to then have a basis for taking it to the state party. The link provided there is the link to the CADEM resolutions page, which again provides a robust, overview of how this process works, and also the actual link to submit a resolution. So it's a lot of information. So that's why we're recording this, so you can go back.
Yeah, there's a lot of information. Here's a lot more.
A lot more, right? So what happens when you submit it? Well, like with Central Committee, that document becomes the property of, the reviewing bodies, the Resolutions Committee. Now, locally, it's your friends and neighbors on the DCC, and you probably know everybody. It's pretty friendly. At the state level, it's a little different. I'm not saying it's unfriendly, but they get a lot of these, and they have to sort through them and do so rather expeditiously. And so they're going to take a very hard line as far as form and function and structure. So if you didn't do it right, you're going to get it back very quickly to fix it. But what they can also do is they're going to fact check. They're going to confirm resolve clauses comply with party rules. So you make sure you know the rules when you write it up. It might give you feedback. And again, because they get so many, or maybe you have processed other ones in the past, they're going to want to know, well, does this really align with something else? Can these be merged? Did we already do this 2 years ago? there's a lot of things that could happen. And that's why you, as an author or a group of authors, may be called to present it at that meeting. And I don't want to say it's like a trial, but they're going to ask you questions. And you need to be prepared to answer those. And it's not necessarily easy to get a resolution through, because they really adhere to the rules pretty strictly. And because they do get so many of these, they really want to ensure that it is something that rises to a level that they should take up, and that doesn't necessarily restate or is so similar to something else that it needs to stand on its own. It needs to be something that's of general concern that they're going to take up.
And
So
just
go
a
ahead.
question there. So it sounds like there is generally an opportunity, or there might be an opportunity for resolution authors to make the case or discuss the resolution they submitted with the resolution committee of KDEM, like at one of their meetings.
Yeah, briefly. It's not going to be a lot of time because, again, they're probably processing a few dozen of these at least. So they might give you some time to deal with it in between, those executive board meetings. When they're meeting, you could possibly get it done in that weekend. But it's best to have it align as best with, the rules and the form to ensure its best chance of success. You really want to pay attention. Do you really follow through?
Dina, question.
Some elementary questions. I'll have some judgment call questions at the end, but just basically fact things. So what is the timing of these? So it says resolution sent to e-board or floor of convention general session. So are all of these decided at the convention, or are some of them decided at regular meetings, and how regular are these regular?
So it's a great question. So executive board technically is a subset of delegates that meet 3 times a year, but that includes the convention itself. So there's going to be an executive board meeting in July, and I believe there'll be one in October. And then a convention will be in the spring, like March, April. So it's one of those meetings.
And then does the resolutions committee meet timed to e-board? So are there like also twice a year plus pre-convention for resolutions committee? How does that process flow work?
Yeah, all standing committees will meet during those executive board / conventions.
Okay. And does this slide deck somewhere have what those calendars typically are? Because I think that is extremely valuable information for people that are new to the process.
Yeah, it does not. I mean, again, it's typically summer, fall, and spring with the convention, but we can add that in later and post this up because the dates do change.
So might it be, for example, that at, say, a regional meeting, there would, earlier on in the span of that weekend, there would be standing committee meetings, including resolutions committee, and then they evaluate resolutions they have to review and make recommendations, and potentially the author could hop in there and give a bit of spiel. And then that recommendation, and we'll talk about this in a second, but it goes on to the general e-board sometime later in that same meeting period, and they then vote.
Yeah, if the committee decides, yes, this will move forward, but then it's presented to the body. Now that body could be just the executive board, which again is a subset of delegates, or the entire convention if it's that convention. And that's typically the last day is Sunday.
Yeah. Word to the wise, I have heard that if you're submitting a resolution and you anticipate maybe not everyone in the world might love it, it's a lot easier to get things through a smaller subset of delegates than the whole 1,700 person quorum or whatever it is on the general floor of the convention. So that could perhaps influence your timing on when you decide to submit a resolution, if it'll be more likely to be processed by and the time of an e-board meeting and evaluated there versus processed in the run up to a full convention and evaluated there. Thought.
Yeah, your e-board's about 300 something delegates, I think, so it's about 10%.
Yeah, no small
That's the
body,
full
but
body. Yeah, that's the full body. By Sunday, it'll be less than that, probably.
And so similar timing question about the San Mateo County Democratic Central Committee. So elementary question, does the resolutions committee meet monthly, and does it meet monthly at some cadence that is X weeks prior to the central committee meeting?
No, typically, again, it's been most months where we get resolutions locally, and subsequent to that, so when we have a resolution or 2 or 3 that are referred to us following the general meeting online, we will meet to discuss, edit, add suggestions to the resolution, and communicate with the author should there be any questions, and then let them know what the recommendation would be prior to the meeting.
But these are scheduled ad hoc as opposed to like every, as opposed to once a month on the first week of the month on Tuesday.
Yeah, because it's also an iterative process. We have a document to work with, and we share that document amongst our members to comment on and make suggestions, and then eventually vote.
So sometimes that involves like assembling a Zoom to talk about things and work through things in person. Or not in person, but like live on Zoom in a synchronous way. And we have done that sometimes, but sometimes we do it asynchronously where folks add edits and comments. We might have some email exchange, and there's and the voting we do through a Google form that can be done asynchronously.
Yeah, because honestly, again, it being an iterative process, it really does not lend itself well to just a meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for helping to demystify the process.
Yes, that is why we're here. Part 2, what happens to your resolution after it's submitted?
Yeah, so this is where it can get wild. So if it's accepted and the resolution, gets presented to the executive board or the convention, which is a bigger subset, in order for really much to happen, it has to be a 60% threshold. So meaning support, opposed, or a neutral position requires a 60% vote. Now, no position is essentially just a failure of a position being established. So by a 50% vote, having gone through that gamut, nothing can happen. There's just no position. So it's not hostile, it's not neutral, it's just there's no position whatsoever. Typically resolutions end up on what's called the consent calendar. So if you're familiar with any government meetings where there's an agenda, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that is just sort of routine, and they approve it all at once, whatever governing body that is. That's typically what happens with non-controversial resolutions. If you're on the consent calendar, the whole body will vote on most of the agenda. It's done. However, voting members can request that items be pulled from the consent agenda. So that means it's then back on the live agenda, then it has to go through that voting process, as we just described. And again, for controversial things, sometimes things we didn't expect to be controversial, that has happened and can happen. But I think for most folks, if you draft a resolution, you're going to know pretty quickly if it's controversial.
Yeah, my first KDEM convention was the virtual one in 2021, and I do recall some live wordsmithing of something geopolitical in this body of like hundreds of people. Yeah. So that that can happen if your thing gets pulled. Yeah, that's the state process. And here's an example of a state resolution that I think is really great. It was drafted by Alfred Twu was the author, who's a wonderful advocate for many wonderful things. And this is about a statement of principle saying that the Democratic Party, the California Democratic Party, supports removing barriers to low-cost housing because whereas zoning and other policies have limited density in certain neighborhoods, leads to long commutes and more pollutions, racial segregation, and whereas President Biden has called for eliminating exclusionary zoning and its various ills, and whereas removing restrictions on multifamily dwellings allow us to achieve inclusionary housing in all communities and all the good things that come from that, therefore be it resolved that the California Democratic Party supports removing barriers to truly affordable housing, such as zoning restrictions that limit multifamily dwellings. So if you didn't know, this is the California Democratic Party's position. And to provide housing that's more within people's means and address our state's homelessness crisis, equitable and diverse communities, and incentivize transitions to smaller homes, more homes on existing lots to help reduce energy usage and meet our climate goals. And this was adopted at the November 2021 Executive Board meeting. So you'll notice there's no asking of any specific person to do any specific thing.
Right.
There's no mention of any specific bills that do these things. It's just a statement of values and a good value at that. So
And elements of policy. I mean, there's definitely elements of policy there, but to Karen's point, it's broad.
So what is a resolution's impact? You go through all the trouble of doing all these things. What happens? So resolutions will be communicated to relevant bodies. So for example, if a county Dems resolution is calling on some body to do something, we have to, share that resolution with them so they know. And it'll also be published on the organization's website. So you saw the screenshots of the websites before for our county and state parties. And then what actually happens with them? They can guide future decisions made by the organization. So, it can influence, while it doesn't specify candidate or legislative endorsements, it can say, well, this is our statement of values and this policy or this candidate aligns with it in this way and this other one in this other way. So we're going to support things in accordance with our values. It can shape relationships with public officials, in some cases, especially at the county level, when you explicitly call things out. If you're thanking officials for something in your resolution, they're probably happy. If you're telling them to do things very differently than how they want to do them, they might not like it, but it's still important to tell them. Or even when you're not addressing a specific set of public officials, the policy, the values positions you take in a resolution can influence that relationship. It can help them understand where your organization is coming from and can serve as a starting point for discussion. And David, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I'd add maybe one more. I probably should have put this on. Joining in coalition on an issue. Recently, for example, there was going to be a ballot initiative to help reduce plastics in manufactured goods, assess a fee. This was the Plastics Free California ballot proposition. Well, this is going to be on November, but a lot of the early work by the coalition working on this was to get other organizations involved and to pass things like resolutions to say, this is our, we like this concept, we support this, we're going to add our name to the list of supporters of this effort. What happens sometimes, and what happened in this case, was I think the opponents of this, which are primarily manufacturers who use plastic in their products, kind of saw the writing on the wall in the sense that that coalition was growing and growing rapidly. And they kind of knew, like, well, we can fight this at the ballot, but this seems to be gaining a lot of traction. So instead, they went to the legislature to then craft a legislative solution, something that they could maybe more live with. I haven't actually seen it yet, but So rather than go to the ballot, this issue was addressed legislatively because organizations like ours passed resolutions saying, hey, we're gonna support this ballot proposition. And we're gonna get behind that. So these things can work both individually, but also collectively.
Oh, that's a really good point. And yeah, I recall other resolutions that I've seen that are for coalition building purposes, and that's very awesome. And then, you know, you're with your resolutions, you're putting your organization's principles out there, spelled out. And if your actions don't align with that, people may notice and, you know, have that discussion. And so it's really, you know, that can be a good thing. But it's really about like an explicit articulation of values, and then how that guides that can guide various things, as we just discussed. So this is a part where it's open for questions. Adina, any questions you might have are of course very welcome.
Yeah, so the main body questions I have is like, thanks very much for going through the rules. And there's obviously, you know, plenty of rules where you need to follow them. If you don't follow them, your thing gets bounced, and that's like essential to know. The question I have is about customs, and are there customs that, in addition, that you wanted to describe about how resolutions get brought forward at the county level or the state level, that as a matter of practice, you would say, like, this is good practice to do?
About customs, but I think it's more about, you know, due diligence. When crafting something, again, sometimes it's not that controversial. It's not that you know, dense a topic, but ensure that you've talked to stakeholders ahead of time so that you know what some of the disagreements might be. We had a resolution very recently that dealt with what on its surface looked like a pretty uncontroversial topic. But lo and behold, there was a little bit of controversy about it, and that was not easily anticipated by those of us who received it, because again, we're not the experts on the subject. It's the sponsors, the authors typically have done the research. Those pitfalls are very easy to get into. That's why it takes, you know, some thought, some discussion, some investigation ahead of time that's really warranted sometimes.
Another, I think, good practice, and I've heard this from someone on the KDEM resolution committee, is that engage with the committee. So particularly if they reach out to you, you know, be very, make yourself available to talk about it and engage in a back and forth. That seems like something that the committee sometimes struggles with. So, you know, be responsive and engaged with the committee. And, you know, you can also, you can, I think, proactively reach out to the committee and say, are there any concerns or anything you'd want to, you know, walk through with me, or changes that can be part of the process. Or I guess at the sort of informally at the county level, at the state level, it looks like, you know, there's an opportunity to attend the resolution committee's meeting and actually potentially speak there or answer questions there. So engage with the committee wherever, when possible, or and ask questions whenever you're unsure about something, rather than assuming this is the way it goes.
Yeah, another issue also, again, in terms of researching from our bylaws, you know, there are restrictions as to who can introduce. So you have to be a member or an alternate in order to be the individual introducing it. So you might be around the central committee, you might want to have it introduced, but if you're not sort of in the membership queue, then you actually don't have the right to do it.
And one question I had is just about, lobbying, like particularly at the state level, do people do some kind of like whipping of support for resolutions? What does that look like?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I mean, because at times there are some very heated battles over these things, and whipping. I have been whipped over a number of things in the past, and yeah, you want to get your voters there to ensure the outcome. If it is controversial, you need those votes.
So that would be, sort of talking to your network in either the e-board membership or the general membership, and saying, hey, can I talk to you a little bit about this resolution? This is why it's
Sure.
important, blah, blah, blah. So that's, it looks like another potential custom or good practice that one could engage in.
Mhm. Any other questions from our gallery of one?
Yeah, so I just want to use as a little mini case study something that I wound up getting involved in because somebody asked me to, and this was the resolution in support of Latifah Simon, who is the excellent board director who had a very unfortunate occurrence where, due to some problems, wound up needing to step down briefly from her board seat because she had moved into apparently like the wrong apartment in an apartment complex that had apartments in more than one district. And as an alternate, somebody came to me and said, will you bring this resolution to the Democratic Central Committee? And I said, yeah, Latifah Simon's great. Yeah, sure. And but I don't have no time, so can you please do all the legwork? And what I'm understanding here is a couple things, just to make sure I understand this. So apparently that person went to the resolutions committee, reviewed the resolution with them, and got it approved by the committee. And then that's when I was the figurehead, is the wrong word because I supported the thing.
Well,
but
you were the formal sponsor. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you for telling me what the right word was, which I didn't even know. And therefore, sponsored it and put it forward and helped the person who was really behind this to encourage other people to support, which I was happy to do because I totally supported it. So that's, and I can't remember whether it was an urgency matter or not. It might have been because it.
Yeah.
So
It probably was, because that was sort of that was a rapidly unfolding situation, but yeah.
Yeah, and the one correction I would make is that because I remember this, it didn't go through the committee in the sense of like, to go through the committee, things that go through on urgency by definition kind of don't go through the committee process because they just give it on that day. But people who are considering bringing something up on urgency or otherwise are free to reach out to people they know on the committee. And in this case, this person actually reached out to me and said, hey, what do you think of this? Blah, blah, blah. And I probably said, oh, that, you need to find I said, you need to find a sponsor. I probably gave him your name, and as someone who would do it potentially, or who has an aligned interest, and by the way, these are the rules, this many clauses, this many this, so I think you can tap the expertise of people on the committee in your pre-work before you introduce it, but that's not the same as going through the committee.
Right. And that does bring up.
So what was the process that they actually did follow to get that through?
Sometimes, and I don't recall with that one, but honestly, again, as an urgency, if it is introduced at a general meeting, the body can vote on it that moment. Again, you risk sort of the 2/3. Maybe it has to have some editing. There might be some issues with it, but it can be done. Sometimes, and this kind of brings up, this is a good custom, if someone intends to bring a resolution for an urgency approval, So they absolutely intend not to go to the resolutions committee process. We have been contacted in the past, I mean, myself or other individuals, just by authors saying, hey, look, I'm going to go through this urgency process, bypassing your committee, but before the meeting, 2 days before, 3 days before, could you just look at this to ensure that its form is okay? And I don't do that as chair of the committee, because the committee is not, they don't touch it if it's urgency. But just because I know the process, I can say, okay, look, you know, yeah, you have the 3 whereases, you have 2 resolves. So, you know, generally speaking, this is, you got the form right. It's with the right length, etc. Or make some suggestions, but that's sort of an informal process.
Maybe one missing piece is just about getting a resolution on the agenda to be discussed, urgency or otherwise. So is that, and actually I've never tried to do this. So is that a matter of just emailing the chair and saying, hey, I'd like to get this on?
Yeah, because it has to appear on the agenda as for the first reading. So you're putting it out there. Everyone gets a first peek at it. Again, we don't really talk about it all that much at the first reading. It then gets referred to committee, and then the real action starts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But that goes, the process there is that it goes to the chair and somebody says, I would like to have this brought forward at first reading at this meeting as an agenda item.
Yeah, because it has to be on the agenda. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
And so, and it's good to do that, you know, at least a week ahead of time before the next meeting, because that way, you know, they send out the agenda packets and all of that in the couple days run up. So the more lead time you can give before the next meeting, probably the better. Would be a good custom probably, because if the meeting's on, you know, we have our meetings on Thursdays, and probably by Wednesday the agenda packet's gone out. So if you tried to send it to someone like, oh, can you get this on the agenda for next week, for tomorrow, not sure if that would go through, but if you give it to them, you know, a week ahead of time or something like that.
At least a week. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And those are good things to be like written down on these slides for other people who may wish to follow up with as a reference.
Good idea.
And then I think I have a final question, which is, can either of you think of your favorite example of a resolution that you think was successful, and which one was it and why?
Oh boy. I'd have to go back and look at just to get the prompt, you know. I mean, there's been a number of them.
Not just successful that it passed, that it got a majority, but that it seemed to have some kind of good intent and it was effective at, you know, advancing its intent.
Again, I think the most effective ones typically are like the one we passed fairly recently regarding police oversight commission. And it's because it's working in concert, in coalition with a lot of other groups, a lot of other organizations and leaders to, you know, apply some pressure to move a policy along. That's probably the most recent one I can think of.
Yeah, I think that's a good example, because it made it clear that the San Mateo County Democratic Party believes in oversight of policing, and you know, that was something that, you know, law enforcement leadership had to reckon with, and that, you know, it did you know, it impacted that relationship, and impacted that conversation. And I think it also, you know, I'm not sure if you can necessarily pin subsequent endorsement decisions back to that specific resolution, and maybe things would have happened all the same if that resolution hadn't passed. But I think it crystallized something that was then carried forward in other actions that SMC Dems has taken, like supporting the Fix in San Mateo County group and their principles, like the endorsement for sheriff, for someone who does speak about accountability in a much more positive way. And so, yeah, I would agree with David. That's a good example of a successful resolution.
Yeah, and again, I mean, that's because it was also just in coalition language. It's a critical mass of local support, right? And I mean, there was also a resolution not too long ago dealing with decarbonization, electrifying buildings. And again, that was just part of a larger effort involving a lot of different organizations to help advance that, at the very least, at the local level, because these things had to do with city council decisions, your reach code, those kinds of things. So again, I think it's strongest in coalition.
Actually, going back to the sheriff oversight one, the other thing that I think was successful about it, so just speaking personally, so I think I got involved shortly after that passed, maybe with the County Democratic Party, and I like many people in 2020 was looking for, like, what is an impactful policy that can move the needle on racial justice and policing in our area. And in conversations with people, including people from the party, someone referred me to this resolution and this very concrete ask. And I was like, oh, that makes a ton of sense. And I then aligned myself as an activist and behind that ask in certain ways. And part of and including reaching out to one of the authors of the resolution and learning more about the issue from them. And so it can serve as this guidepost for people who want to get involved in some way, and they're like, what is my local Democratic Party, declaring as a good way forward. So that's another sort of side benefit that, just how individuals seeking like policy paths forward might identify priorities based on resolutions.
And as a tangible product too. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Karen, for all your work.
Yeah, thank you, David, for all the guidance and shepherding in your work. And thank you, Dina, for showing up and asking excellent questions. If we had to have one attendee, you are the best attendee we could have had. So I really appreciate that, because you ask really clarifying questions that identify the gaps where things are not obvious. And that is exactly what we're trying to do.
And thank you so much for putting this on. I'm so glad that this will then be available for other people that are interested in picking this up and bringing forward resolutions in an informed manner. And I was really happy to show up and learn this because of, in part because of that example with the Latifah Simon resolution, where somebody was like, can you help with this? And I'm like, sure, I will do whatever you tell me because I agree with the substance, but I have no idea what's going on whatsoever. And so now I think I have a much better sense of what was happening and what that process was and how it works. So thanks.
And that's why I wanted this to live on without us, because people change, names change, in these bodies, and that knowledge doesn't necessarily get passed along, and the Democratic Party can be a little Byzantine for sure. So hopefully this will, one aspect we can clarify a little bit.
Yep.
All right, well, thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, people of the future. Enjoy, write good resolutions. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.